Welcome to History at Bedtime. Before sunrise, the temple is still almost completely dark. The city beyond its walls has begun to stir. Bakers are coaxing heat back into ovens. Donkeys are being loaded. Somewhere along the Nile, a boatman is testing the rope that will hold his vessel to the quay until the current is right. But inside the great enclosure of Amunius at Karnak, the world has narrowed to stone, oil, linen, incense, and a door that is not yet open. A priest approaches the sanctuary. He is washed. He has put on clean linen. He has followed rules whose purpose is not personal comfort, but preparation. The place ahead is not understood as an ordinary room. It is the innermost point of a vast architectural body, a small chamber hidden behind courts, pylons, halls, columns, side chapels, storerooms, gateways, and walls. Thousands of tons of stone stand between this door and the ordinary streets of Thebes. The closer one comes to the center, the fewer people are permitted to continue. The priest breaks the seal. The doors of the shrine open. Inside is the divine image. To a modern visitor, a cult statue can appear to be an object, carved stone, wood, metal, or precious material shaped by human hands. To the people who built temples, that distinction was not so simple. The image was made, certainly. Craftsmen had cut and polished it. Priests knew the material from which it had been fashioned. Yet within ritual, the image could become the place where a divine presence was made accessible. The god was not trapped inside it like a person locked in a room. The image was a point of encounter. This morning, as on mornings before it, the priest addresses the god. Offerings are presented. Incense rises. The image is cared for. In Egyptian temple ritual, the divine statue could be washed, clothed, anointed, and fed through offerings placed before it. The actions are intimate. They are also cosmic. To perform them correctly is to participate in maintaining order itself, the balance the Egyptians called Ma'at, truth, rightness, continuity, the proper arrangement by which the sun rises, the Nile returns, the king rules, the dead receive offerings, and chaos remains beyond the boundary where it belongs. The priest is serving one image in one dark room, but the work is meant for the whole world. That tension is the beginning of tonight's story. For thousands of years, human beings built structures that seem impossibly large for what happened at their centers. Mountains of brick surrounded small shrines. Forests of columns led toward chambers where only a few people could enter. Cities spent treasure on buildings that ordinary citizens might never see from the inside. Kings covered walls with victories. Farmers carried offerings to gates. Priests climbed steps, opened doors, spoke words, lit fires, washed statues, killed animals, poured wine, burned incense, watched stars, counted days, and guarded spaces where heaven and earth were believed to come close enough to touch. A temple could be a house for a god. It could be a treasury, a stage for royal power, an archive, a landowner, a workshop, a calendar, a monument to victory, a place of sacrifice, a destination for pilgrimage, a machine for transforming darkness into light, or a mountain constructed where the landscape provided none. Sometimes it was several of these things at once. And then, eventually, every ancient temple faced the same test. The ritual stopped. The offering tables went dry. The doors were left closed or broken open. A sacred image was carried away, buried, smashed, reinterpreted, or forgotten. Roofs fell. Columns cracked. New religions entered old spaces. New rulers carved their own names over older names. Farmers took stone. Earthquakes shifted foundations. Sand accumulated. Jungle covered stairways. Cities died around structures that had once stood at their centers. Yet the buildings endured long enough to ask a question their builders never expected us to ask. What happens to a house of a god when the god is no longer being served there? To answer it, we have to go backward, before Karnak, before the Parthenon, before the Pantheon, before the great pyramid temples of Mesoamerica, to a landscape where stone was scarce and mud was everywhere. Southern Mesopotamia, around the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, did not naturally provide the sort of mountains that later religious imagination would repeatedly associate with the divine. The land was broad and low. Rivers shifted across an alluvial plain. Reeds grew in marshes. Mud could be shaped into bricks. Stone and large timber were valuable because they had to come from somewhere else. If a city wanted a mountain, it had to build one. At Ellora, workers carried baskets of earth and brick toward a rising platform dedicated to Nana, the moon god and patron of the city. The ruler Ellora, who reigned around the beginning of the 21st century BCE, initiated one of the most famous building programs in Mesopotamian history. His successors continued it. The structure that emerged was a ziggurat, a massive step tower with a mud brick core and a more durable outer facing of baked brick, rising above the houses, workshops, canals, courtyards, and lanes below. Imagine approaching it before dawn. The first thing you would notice would not be fine sculpture. It would be scale. On the flat plane, height announces itself. A structure does not need to be as tall as a natural mountain to dominate a city that has no other mountain. The ziggurat at Ellora rose in stages, its great stairways gathering movement upward. From below, the human figures climbing would have seemed increasingly small against the brick mass. From above, the city would have spread outward in a patchwork of roofs and walls, with fields and water beyond. The ziggurat was not simply an enormous pedestal for crowds. Access to its highest sacred spaces was restricted. Mesopotamian temples were not assembly halls in the modern sense. They belonged to a religious economy in which gods were understood as owners, patrons, and powers whose households required service. Temples possessed land, employed workers, received produce, distributed rations, stored goods, commissioned objects, kept accounts, and maintained ritual calendars. The divine household was also an institution in the city. A farmer bringing grain to a temple complex did not need to imagine that spirituality and administration were opposites. The grain could be economic and sacred at the same time. A flock could belong to a god. A field could produce barley for offerings and wages. A scribe recording deliveries was performing work that made ritual possible. A brewer preparing beer for temple use participated in the maintenance of the divine household even if he never approached its most restricted spaces. This is one of the easiest things to lose when we look at ruins. Ruins remove the people who carried sacks. They remove the smell of animals, the arguments over measurements, the apprentices learning to write, the cooks, gardeners, boatmen, cleaners, guards, singers, craftsmen, priests, and officials. What remains is architecture, and architecture can make ancient religion look more silent than it was. A functioning temple was rarely silent for long. There were footsteps, animals, chanting, bargaining, doors, metal tools, baskets dragged over floors, water poured from jars, reeds rustling near canals, clay tablets pressed beneath a stylus. There were festival days when movement intensified and ordinary routes changed because a divine image might leave its sanctuary in procession. The god's house touched every part of the city without becoming a public building in the modern sense. In Mesopotamian thought, the gods were not abstract principles floating at a safe distance from politics. Cities had divine patrons. Kings claimed legitimacy through relationships with the divine world. Victory, famine, flood, disease, and prosperity could be interpreted through divine favor and displeasure. A temple therefore occupied dangerous ground. It was a place of devotion, but also a place where claims about who should rule could be made visible. When a king restored a temple, he did more than repair walls. He announced that he could renew the proper relationship between the city and its god. When he placed an inscription in a foundation deposit, hidden from ordinary sight, He addressed future rulers as well as divine powers. He asked them not to destroy his work. He named himself so that restoration would carry memory forward. Kings understood that buildings outlived speeches. They also understood that buildings could be destroyed. Mesopotamian cities experienced conquest repeatedly. Temples were looted. Cult statues could be carried away as trophies. To remove a divine image was not merely to steal expensive material. It could be understood as the defeat, abandonment, or forced relocation of the god's presence. The loss was political and theological at once. This is why the return of a captured statue could be celebrated as restoration of cosmic order. The god had come home. The city had become itself again. In this world, height mattered, but the heart of sacred architecture was not height alone. It was relationship. A ziggurat rose upward. A shrine enclosed. An offering crossed from human hands toward divine possession. A priest crossed a threshold others could not. A king crossed from political power into sacred representation. A festival carried a god temporarily into streets where ordinary people could see, hear, and respond. The temple made these crossings possible. And because they were possible, rules mattered. Who could enter? Who could touch? Who could see? Who could speak? What could be offered? When could the doors open? Which day belonged to which god? What happened if impurity entered a sacred place? What happened if the king failed in his duties? Every temple was partly an answer to such questions. The answers changed from civilization to civilization, but one pattern appears again and again. The closer one moved toward the divine center, the more ordinary behavior fell away. The history of Mesopotamian temples did not stop with Ur. More than a millennium later, farther north along the great river systems, Babylon made sacred architecture part of one of the most famous urban landscapes of antiquity. At the center of Babylonian religious life stood As-Sagila, the great temple complex of Marduk, the city's chief god, and nearby rose Edamananke, the ziggurat whose Sumerian ceremonial name can be translated as something like the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Ancient descriptions and later reconstructions suggest a huge stage tower dominating a city already filled with gates, palaces, canals, shrines, processional streets, houses, workshops, and defensive walls. Later traditions connected Babylon so powerfully with an immense tower that modern readers naturally think of the biblical Tower of Babel. The relationship between a specific historical ziggurat and the biblical story is more complicated than a simple identification, and we should resist pretending archaeology can prove a literary memory in one step. But Babylon did possess exactly the kind of monumental temple tower that could become, in another tradition, a symbol of human ambition reaching toward heaven. For the Babylonians themselves, the tower was not an insult to the gods. It belonged to their service. The city did not challenge heaven by building upward. It made a place where earth and heaven could be joined within the proper divine order. That order became especially visible during the Akitu, the Babylonian New Year festival. The surviving evidence comes from different periods and is incomplete, but the festival linked Marduk, kingship, procession, sacred texts, and the renewal of cosmic and political order. The king's role was not merely to sit above ritual as a spectator. His legitimacy had to be placed inside a divine framework. One famous part of later Babylonian festival tradition involved the king entering Marduk's temple and undergoing a ritual in which royal power was temporarily humbled before the god. The details and continuity of this ceremony across all periods are debated, but the political meaning is unmistakable. The king ruled greatly, yet not independently of the divine order that made kingship legitimate. That is a remarkable idea to build into a temple ritual. The palace says the king commands. The temple can say the king answers. This tension appears across ancient civilizations. Rulers finance temples because sacred architecture strengthens authority. Yet the same temple can place the ruler beneath a god, a law, a cosmic order, or a priestly tradition that cannot simply be reduced to royal will. Temple and throne therefore need one another and compete with one another. A wealthy priesthood can become politically dangerous. A king can reform worship to weaken an institution. A conquering ruler can present himself as restorer of a foreign temple rather than destroyer, because the gods of conquered peoples can become useful partners in imperial government. The ancient Near East repeatedly demonstrates that religious tolerance and religious domination are not simple opposites. An empire might allow local cults to continue because continuity made rule easier. Another ruler might carry off statues to punish rebellion. A later ruler might return them and announce divine favor. Sacred architecture was therefore part of diplomacy. To restore a temple was to speak to a city's god in the language of politics. To neglect it was also a message. Babylon itself became a lesson in impermanence. Empires fought over it. Rulers rebuilt it. Persian kings inherited it. Alexander the Great entered it centuries later and planned work there before his death. Ancient writers remembered grandeur even as the city's political center of gravity shifted. The ziggurat decayed because mud brick requires maintenance. This is easy to forget when comparing Mesopotamia with Egypt or Greece. Stone can survive abandonment with dramatic ruin. Mud brick returns more quickly to earth. A tower that once dominated a skyline can become a mound whose shape must be reconstructed by archaeology and texts. Material determines memory. Egypt's stone temples leave columns. Mesopotamia's brick temples often leave foundations, platforms, fragments, inscriptions, and earthworks. The civilization that built upward can look flatter and ruined than civilizations that built from stone. Silence is therefore unequal. Some ancient religions left enormous vertical ghosts. Others sank back into the soil. But both were once full of doors that opened at dawn. That principle would reach one of its most elaborate architectural expressions along the Nile. By the time the priest at Karnak opens the sanctuary doors in our imagined morning, Egyptian temple architecture carries centuries of accumulated practice. The complex around him is not the work of a single ruler or a single generation. Karnak grew through additions, removals, restorations, usurpations, new gateways, new courts, new chapels, new obelisks, new walls. Pharaoh after pharaoh inserted himself into a sacred landscape already ancient in his own lifetime. Ammonius' great temple at Thebes became a place where stone itself accumulated political memory. To understand what that meant, imagine approaching during a festival rather than before dawn. Thebes is crowded. People have come from nearby settlements and from farther along the Nile. Traders know that festivals are opportunities. Families have prepared food. Officials organize movement. Soldiers and guards keep routes clear. Musicians gather. Priests prepare sacred equipment. The divine image that spends ordinary days hidden inside the temple may soon travel beyond the sanctuary in a portable shrine or sacred bark, carried through a ceremonial landscape usually closed to the public gaze. Now the temple changes character. The same walls that normally restrict access become the source from which divine presence emerges. Ordinary people may never enter the darkest rooms, but they can wait outside. They can watch the procession. They can pray as the god passes. They can interpret the movement of the sacred bark. They can bring petitions. The divine world is not democratic, but neither is it completely inaccessible. At Karnak, architecture intensifies the journey inward. A monumental pylon presents a vast facade, its sloping towers rising on either side of a central gate. Beyond lies a court. Beyond that, another threshold. The famous Great Hypostyle Hall overwhelms human scale with columns so large that several people joining hands could not easily encircle some of them. Their carved surfaces once carried much more color than surviving stone suggests. Capitals evoke plants. Walls showed kings before gods, kings receiving life, kings defeating enemies, kings making offerings. The imagery repeats for a reason. Ritual repetition is not failed creativity. It says that order must be renewed. The king must defeat chaos again. The god must receive offerings again. The sun must rise again. The river must return again. The temple does not tell a story once and move on. It participates in a cycle whose power lies precisely in continuation. But repetition inside ritual is different from repetition in memory. For the people living then, yesterday's offering did not make today's unnecessary. A wall scene of the king smiting enemies may appear politically boastful, and it was, but it also belonged to a larger symbolic grammar. The enemy could represent disorder. The king's victory could represent restoration of balance. Historical enemies, cosmic chaos, royal ideology, and divine legitimacy were layered together until a single image could operate in several worlds at once. As a visitor moves inward, the spaces often become lower, darker, more restricted. Public scale gives way to concentration. The sanctuary is not the largest room. It does not need to be. Power is being compressed. In the innermost chambers, the god's presence is handled through ritual by people trained and purified for the task. The world outside may contain noise, commerce, politics, and crowds. Here, the sequence narrows to precise gestures. Open the shrine. Reveal the image. Offer incense. Present food. Dress and anoint. Speak the words. Close what must be closed again. The rhythm can sound almost domestic. That is the point. The god has a house because the divine is being approached through the language of household care. Yet this is a household unlike any other, because failure at its center is imagined to have consequences far beyond one room. The temple also has practical power. Great Egyptian temple institutions controlled estates, workshops, personnel, storage, and transport. Priests could become important political actors. Offerings entering the temple did not simply disappear. Food presented ritually could later support temple staff. Land endowed to a god produced crops through human labor. Herds required herders. Boats carried grain and stone. Craftsmen shaped metal and wood. Scribes tracked quantities. The divine economy was built from human bodies and ordinary work. This, too, complicates the silence of ruins. Karnak today can feel like a place abandoned by sound. Ancient Karnak was a place of management on an enormous scale, and it was never finished. That may be one of the deepest differences between an ancient temple complex and a modern monument imagined as complete at the moment of dedication. A ruler could build a pylon. Another ruler could place an obelisk. A later ruler could erase a predecessor's name, restore an older chapel, build a new court, dismantle material, or redirect a procession. The sacred place accumulated argument in stone. Sometimes the argument became violent. When Akhenaten promoted the Aten and turned against the established cults, Ammonius' name and images became targets. After Akhenaten's death, his religious revolution was reversed, and his own memory became vulnerable. Blocks from his buildings were reused. Gods and kings who had seemed permanent became subjects of erasure and restoration within a few generations. The temple endured by changing. That is another pattern we will follow tonight. Sacred architecture often survives not because nobody touches it, but because later people find new reasons to keep using the place. A sanctuary may become a church. A church may rise on a temple platform. A conquered people may bury a shrine beneath a larger shrine. A ruler may preserve an older inscription because its age strengthens his own authority. A building survives by becoming useful to someone who does not believe exactly what its first builders believed. Before we reach those later transformations, however, we have to stay in Egypt a little longer because Egyptian temples reveal something essential about sacred architecture that a photograph cannot show. The building was meant to move people through time as well as space. Festival calendars mattered. Processional routes mattered. The rising and setting of celestial bodies mattered. The Nile's cycle mattered. A temple participated in rhythms larger than itself. Some sacred buildings were carefully oriented in relation to landscape and sky, but we should be cautious about imagining that every axis encoded a single secret astronomical message. Temples grew, were rebuilt, and responded to local topography as well as ritual concerns. Ancient architects could combine practical constraints, inherited tradition, and celestial symbolism without needing one universal formula. What mattered was that sacred space was not random space. Direction carried meaning. Approach carried meaning. Light carried meaning. Darkness carried meaning. Water carried meaning. The route a procession followed could turn a city into part of the temple. During the Opet festival at Thebes, Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu traveled ceremonially between Karnak and Luxor. The journey linked temples, kingship, renewal, river, streets, and crowds. Sacred architecture extended beyond walls through movement. The divine image left its hidden chamber, entered a portable shrine, traveled through a landscape full of watching people, and later returned. For a brief time, the hidden became visible without becoming ordinary. That may be why procession appears in so many religious traditions. A God who never leaves the sanctuary risks becoming too distant. A God carried among people becomes accessible while remaining protected by ritual. The temple breathes. It closes around the divine. Then, on appointed days, it opens. By late afternoon, the festival route fills with dust, music, heat, and human bodies. The divine bark passes. A woman lifts a child to see. An old man who cannot enter the sanctuary presses as close as guards allow. A scribe recognizes officials by their linen and jewelry. Vendors watch the crowd while keeping one eye on their goods. Priests bear a weight that is physical and sacred at once. No one experiences the temple in the same way. The king sees a stage on which his legitimacy can be renewed. A priest sees obligation. A worker sees employment. A pilgrim sees hope. A farmer sees a god whose favor belongs to the flood and harvest. A foreign envoy sees wealth and order. A child sees columns larger than anything built by human hands should reasonably be. The temple contains all these interpretations because sacred architecture is never only theology. It is theology built inside society. And society brings hierarchy, labor, money, fear, ambition, beauty, exclusion, memory, and politics through every gate. Before the marble temples of classical Athens rose in their final form, another sacred building in the Eastern Mediterranean had already made restriction itself one of the central facts of religious life. Jerusalem's temple belonged to a different theological world from Karnak. The god worshipped there was not represented by a cult statue cared for through the daily washing and dressing of a divine body. The biblical tradition increasingly defined Israel's God as one who could not be reduced to an image made by human hands. Yet this did not make sacred space less important. It made the innermost emptiness more powerful. The history of the first temple, traditionally associated with Solomon, comes to us through biblical texts written and edited across long periods, supplemented by archaeology from Jerusalem and the wider region. The precise architecture of the earliest sanctuary cannot be reconstructed with the confidence available for the Parthenon or the Pantheon. What is historically clear is that Jerusalem became the central sanctuary of Judah, and that the Babylonian conquest of the city in the early 6th century BCE destroyed the temple and carried elites into exile. For a community whose political identity, royal tradition, sacrificial worship, and sacred geography were bound to Jerusalem, destruction created a theological crisis larger than the loss of a building. If a god's temple falls, what has happened? Has the god been defeated? Has the people been rejected? Can worship survive away from the sacred center? Can a community remain a community when the place toward which it was ordered has been burned? These questions became part of Jewish religious thought with enormous consequences. Exile did not end the tradition. It transformed it. When Judean exiles and their descendants returned under Persian rule, a second temple was built in Jerusalem, completed in the late 6th century BCE. Centuries later, Herod the Great transformed the temple complex on a monumental scale. Beginning around the late 1st century BCE, he enlarged and rebuilt the sacred precinct, creating an immense platform supported by retaining walls and surrounded by courts, gates, porticos, and approaches. The temple that stood in the age of Augustus was therefore both ancient and new. Its ritual claimed continuity with a sacred tradition reaching backward centuries. Its monumental architecture announced the resources and ambition of a ruler whose own legitimacy was politically complicated. Herod was a client king under Roman power. Building magnificently in Jerusalem allowed him to present himself as patron of the sacred center, even while many of his subjects viewed his dynasty with suspicion. Again, temple and politics cannot be separated cleanly. Pilgrims approached Jerusalem for major festivals. Sacrifice stood at the center of temple worship. Priestly service followed rules of purity, lineage, schedule, and sacred space. Different courts and thresholds marked different degrees of access. At the center lay the most restricted zone, the Holy of Holies. By the Second Temple period, no great divine statue waited there. The concentration of sanctity did not require an image. This is one of the most important contrasts in our journey. At Karnak, divine presence is made accessible through a cult image. At the Parthenon, Athena's monumental body fills the inner room. In Jerusalem, the deepest sacredness gathers around a place whose power is intensified by what is not shown. Absence becomes presence. The architecture teaches this through restriction. Most worshippers do not enter the innermost space. The high priest enters the Holy of Holies only under exceptional ritual conditions associated with the Day of Atonement. Sacredness is not made public by constant visibility. It is protected by distance. The outer courts can be full of movement. Pilgrims arrive. Animals are brought for sacrifice. Money changes hands because offerings and temple dues must be managed in usable forms. Priests work. Smoke rises. People pray. Teachers argue over law. Political tension accumulates because whoever controls Jerusalem must reckon with a sacred institution that gathers enormous numbers of people and carries authority deeper than ordinary administration. The temple is not simply a religious building inside the city. It is one of the reasons the city matters. That centrality made its destruction in 70 CE catastrophic. During the First Jewish-Roman War, Roman forces under Titus besieged Jerusalem. The city suffered hunger, violence, internal factional conflict, and eventual conquest. The temple burned and was destroyed. The event transformed Judaism. Sacrificial worship centered on the Jerusalem temple could no longer continue in the same way. Priestly institutions lost the physical center around which they had operated. Jewish religious life increasingly developed through prayer, study, law, synagogue, household practice, and rabbinic interpretation rather than through a restored sacrificial cult. A religion organized around a temple survived the loss of the temple. That may be one of the most consequential answers to our question about what happens when ritual stops. Sometimes the sacred building dies, and the religious tradition learns to live without it. The memory of the building then becomes sacred architecture of another kind. Jerusalem remained a holy city. The site of the former temple remained charged with meaning. Later Roman, Christian, and Islamic rulers transformed the city and its sacred topography. The platform eventually became home to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, among the most important sacred buildings in Islam. The Western Wall, part of the retaining structures associated with the Herodian expansion of the Temple Mount, became one of Judaism's most important places of prayer and memory. The same elevated area therefore accumulated sacred histories that cannot be reduced to one another. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Jerusalem became holy through different but overlapping narratives. Sacred space did not pass neatly from one religion to the next like ownership of an ordinary building. It accumulated claim, memory, grief, devotion, and political danger. This is why ancient temples are not merely archaeological. Some of their locations still shape living identities. To speak about them carelessly is to mistake a continuing sacred geography for a dead ruin. Jerusalem also reveals something the great surviving temples can hide. A building can become more powerful in memory after it is gone. No pilgrim today can enter Herod's temple. No archaeologist can reconstruct every chamber directly from an intact ruin. Yet its destruction became a turning point remembered for nearly 2,000 years. The missing building still organizes time, prayer, mourning, scholarship, and imagination. Stone can survive as stone. It can also survive as absence. Across the Mediterranean, Greek sanctuaries offered yet another possibility. A temple could be the place where a god answered back. Centuries later, across the sea, another city would build a temple whose beauty became so famous that later generations often forgot how political it was. Athens had been burned. That mattered before the first new marble block was set in place. In 480 BCE, during the Second Persian invasion of Greece, the Acropolis of Athens fell to Xerxes' forces. Temples and sanctuaries on the sacred rock were damaged or destroyed. The city that later generations would imagine as the triumphant home of classical civilization had, for a time, become a burned and occupied place. The memory of that destruction did not disappear when the Persians withdrew. It remained in stone, in stories, and in the political confidence that Athens developed after the wars. During the following decades, the city became the leader of a maritime alliance that gradually turned into an empire. Tribute from allied communities flowed toward Athens. The democracy expanded participation among male citizens even as Athenian power over other Greek states became increasingly coercive. The sacred rock above the city became one of the places where this new confidence was made visible. In the middle of the 5th century BCE, under the political influence of Pericles, a major building program transformed the Acropolis. The Parthenon was the most famous result, but it belonged to a larger landscape of gates, shrines, older cults, monuments, and routes. It did not stand alone as a perfect white object against an empty sky. Ancient Athens was never that clean. The Acropolis contained color, smoke, bronze, wood, crowds, animals, priests, offerings, inscriptions, temporary structures, and the memory of older buildings beneath newer ones. Marble gleamed, but sculpture was painted. Metal fittings caught the sun. Dedications accumulated. The sacred rock was less like a modern museum and more like a living archive that no one had finished organizing. Construction itself was part of the city's life. Stone had to be quarried, transported, cut, lifted, aligned, polished, and fitted. Teams of laborers and specialists worked under officials who kept accounts. The surviving financial inscriptions remind us that the Parthenon was not created by an abstract thing called Greek genius. It was built through wages, contracts, measurements, mistakes, corrections, schedules, arguments, and thousands upon thousands of individual actions. Somewhere on the Acropolis, a mason looked at a block that would become famous only because he made its surface meet another surface correctly. Most workers were never named in literary history. Their precision became the building's name instead. The architects Ectinus and Callicrates designed a structure that later observers would study obsessively because its apparent regularity depends upon subtle departures from simple geometry. The columns are not perfectly straight cylinders. They swell slightly. The platform is not a perfectly flat plane. Lines that appear horizontal curve. Columns lean inward by tiny degrees. These refinements are often described as optical corrections, and that is partly useful. A large building viewed in strong light can appear distorted if constructed according to rigid geometric regularity. But the refinements are also evidence of something more interesting. The builders cared deeply about the relationship between mathematical form and embodied perception. A temple did not exist only on a drawing. It existed in the eye of a person walking toward it. As the viewer moved, columns overlapped and separated. Light changed across fluting. Sculpture appeared at different angles. The building revealed itself in sequence rather than all at once. The Parthenon's most famous interior object was the colossal statue of Athena Parthenos, created under the direction of Phidias. Gold and ivory covered a wooden core. The goddess stood armed, monumental, and richly equipped with imagery whose details carried mythological and political meaning. Modern reconstructions vary, and the original statue is lost, but ancient descriptions and later copies make clear that the effect was intended to be overwhelming. The gold itself mattered in more than one way. It was sacred display, artistic material, and reserve wealth. Ancient sources indicate that the removable gold plates of the statue could be weighed. The divine image stood at the intersection of devotion and finance, which would not have seemed contradictory in the same way it might to a modern observer trained to separate religion from public treasury. The Parthenon also stored treasure. This is crucial because calling it simply a temple can make us imagine a building whose sole function was worship. Greek sanctuaries were economic spaces as well as sacred ones. Valuable dedications were gifts to gods, but gifts to gods still had material existence. They needed guarding. Inventories could be kept. Metal could be weighed. A sanctuary's wealth could be political power made visible. And the Parthenon itself was political power made beautiful. Its sculptural programs celebrated myth, order, civic identity, and the goddess who protected Athens. Its construction came during the period when Athens commanded resources from an alliance whose members did not all experience Athenian leadership as benevolent. The building later became a symbol of democracy, but its creation belonged equally to the story of empire. This does not diminish the architecture. It makes the architecture historical. Beauty does not cancel the conditions that paid for it, nor do those conditions make the beauty unreal. Ancient temples repeatedly hold such contradictions. They can be sincere religious offerings and demonstrations of domination. They can create communal identity while excluding much of the population from power. They can shelter images of divine justice while kings carve scenes of conquest into their walls. Stone does not solve moral contradictions. It preserves them. Greek sanctuaries also carried another kind of power that is easy to miss when attention settles on columns and sculpture. They could make ordinary actions more dangerous to violate. A promise made before a god was not merely a private statement. An oath called divine witnesses. A treaty deposited in a sanctuary gained a sacred setting. A valuable dedication belonged, in principle, to the deity. A person who approached an altar or sacred image as a supplicant could place an opponent in a difficult position because dragging someone away from divine protection risked pollution, anger, scandal, or retaliation. This protection was never absolute. Ancient history contains plenty of examples in which sacred refuge failed and sanctuaries were violated. That is precisely why the idea mattered. Violence inside sacred space required explanation in a way ordinary violence might not. The temple could therefore change the moral pressure surrounding a human body. A fugitive at an altar was physically the same person who had been running through the street moments earlier. But the location changed the problem. To seize him now was to cross a sacred boundary. Architecture had altered politics without moving anyone very far. Sanctuaries could also become places where collective memory was stored in material form. Victorious cities dedicated captured weapons. Individuals offered statues. Communities erected treasuries. Inscriptions recorded gifts, laws, honors, accounts, or agreements. Objects accumulated because people believed that placing them before a god increased the seriousness of what they represented. A sword on a battlefield is a weapon. The same sword hung in a sanctuary becomes memory. Treasure stored under divine protection carried a similar transformation. The metal remained metal, but ownership and danger changed. Theft was not simply robbery from another person. It was robbery from a god. This helps explain why ancient sanctuaries repeatedly became targets during war. Wealth attracts armies. Sacred reputation can protect treasure during peace and advertise treasure during invasion. The temple's success at accumulating gifts can create the conditions for its looting. Once again, sacred power contains its own vulnerability. For ordinary people, these functions made the sanctuary present even when no spectacular festival was occurring. A person might visit to fulfill a vow after recovery from illness, dedicate a small object after safe travel, ask a god for help, seek purification, witness an oath, or simply participate in a family ritual whose details never entered literary history. Most ancient religion happened below the level of famous monuments. The Great Temple becomes visible to us because stone survives. The small offering may tell us more about the person who came. A cheap clay figurine placed in a sanctuary can represent a greater sacrifice to a poor household than an expensive bronze statue represented to a wealthy politician. Value in religion is not measured only by artistic quality. Archaeology preserves social inequality in materials. Gold survives spectacularly. Humble devotion survives in fragments. A temple gathered both. That is why the sacred landscape could become an archive of lives the official inscriptions barely noticed. The Parthenon was also not the whole religion of Athena. This is another place where modern fame can distort ancient importance. Athena had multiple aspects and cults in Athens. The old cult of Athena Polias, the city goddess, was associated with an ancient wooden image and with sacred spaces on the Acropolis distinct from the Parthenon. The later Erechtheion would contain and organize older cult traditions in a complicated site, whose very complexity tells us that religious landscapes resist tidy architectural diagrams. The Parthenon housed Athena Parthenos. The city worshipped Athena in more ways than one building could contain. During the Panathenaic festival, procession transformed Athens into sacred movement. Citizens and participants traveled toward the Acropolis. Animals intended for sacrifice moved with the crowd. Music, garments, civic ranks, foreign residents, girls carrying sacred objects, officials, horsemen, and spectators turned the route into a representation of the community as Athens wished to see itself. At the sanctuary, the central act of sacrifice occurred at an altar, usually outside the temple building itself. This matters because the word temple can mislead modern listeners. A Greek temple was not arranged like a later church in which a congregation entered, sat together, and participated in a service inside. Greek sanctuaries were larger ritual landscapes. The temple housed a cult image and sacred wealth. The altar outside received sacrifice. Procession linked city and sanctuary. Feasting could follow sacrifice. Votive gifts accumulated. Prayer happened in many positions. Religion was distributed through space. Imagine the Panathenaic day at its height. The Acropolis is not silent. An animal resists. Someone shouts. A flute sounds. Smoke thickens. Meat is prepared. Priests manage ritual order. Political leaders are watched because public religion is also public theater. Visitors look toward the new marble buildings. Some older Athenians remember when Persian destruction was still visible everywhere. Younger citizens have grown up in a city whose wealth now seems permanent. The temple appears timeless only because the people around it do not know what will happen next. They do not know that Athens will fight Sparta in a devastating war. They do not know that democracy will be overthrown and restored. They do not know that Macedonian kings will dominate Greece. They do not know that Roman power will absorb the Greek world. They do not know that the Parthenon will become a church, then a mosque, then a powder magazine, and that an explosion in 1687 will tear through the building during a Venetian attack on Ottoman-held Athens. They see a completed temple. History sees a structure only beginning its transformations. This is one of the strangest qualities of sacred buildings. Every generation assumes the present form is meaningful. Later generations prove that meaning can be rewritten. A statue of Athena can disappear while the building remains. A pagan temple can become a Christian church. A church can become a mosque. A mosque can be removed as a later addition by people attempting to reveal an earlier classical past. Restoration itself can become a kind of ritual, governed by modern beliefs about authenticity, heritage, and which historical layer deserves to be most visible. When tourists stand before the Parthenon today, they encounter not simply the 5th century BCE. They encounter centuries of decisions about what to preserve, what to remove, what to reconstruct, what to display in a museum, and what story Greece wishes the monument to tell. Ancient sacred space has become modern national space. Yet something of the original logic remains legible. The building still controls approach. The Acropolis still requires ascent. The horizon still opens around it. The marble still changes with light. The city remains below. Height still creates separation. The goddess is gone, but the architecture continues to stage arrival. The Parthenon made divine protection visible through form, wealth, and the colossal body of Athena. Delphi offered something different. At Delphi, the question was not only how to approach a god, it was how to ask one a question. The sanctuary of Apollo lies on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the landscape itself seems to force the visitor to look upward and outward. Ancient pilgrims did not arrive at an isolated temple standing alone on a flat platform. They climbed through a sanctuary crowded with monuments, treasuries, statues, inscriptions, trophies, and gifts set up by cities and rulers from across the Greek world and beyond. Every dedication said two things at once. Apollo is powerful, and we were important enough to give him this. A visitor following the sacred way toward the temple of Apollo moved through a compressed political history of Greece. One city commemorated a victory. Another displayed wealth. A ruler advertised generosity. A defeated enemy's treasure could be transformed into a sacred gift. The sanctuary belonged to Apollo, but human rivalry filled the route. That rivalry did not cancel the oracle's authority. It helped make the sanctuary pan-Hellenic. Communities that fought one another could still send delegations to the same god. Colonists might seek divine approval before departure. Legislators and rulers could ask questions. Individuals brought private concerns. Ancient sources preserve oracular responses about war, succession, disease, foundation, purification, and fate. Though many surviving sayings were shaped by later storytelling and should not all be treated as stenographic records of exactly what was spoken on a given day. At the center of this process stood the Pythia, the priestess through whom Apollo's oracle was delivered. Later imagination turned her into an almost supernatural figure floating above intoxicating fumes, speaking incomprehensible sounds that male priests then translated. The historical evidence is more complicated. Ancient accounts differ, and modern geological research has revived debates about gases and fissures beneath the site. But no simple chemical explanation can replace the ritual system in which the oracle operated. The Pythia was not a laboratory instrument. She belonged to a sacred institution. Questions had procedures. Days of consultation followed ritual rules. Sacrifice and purification mattered. Priests and attendants managed access. The words of the oracle gained authority because they emerged from a place whose entire landscape had been organized as Apollo's domain. Here, architecture did something different from the Pantheon. It did not simply awe the visitor with interior space. It prepared the visitor to receive ambiguity as divine speech. An oracle that answered every question like a modern instruction manual would not have required interpretation. Delphic responses became famous partly because language could be layered, conditional, or dangerous to misunderstand. A ruler might hear what he wished to hear and discover too late that the words allowed another meaning. The temple therefore created not certainty, but a disciplined encounter with uncertainty. That is a strange and profound religious function. People came to a god because they did not know what would happen. The sanctuary did not abolish uncertainty. It gave uncertainty a sacred form. Delphi's landscape contributed to that experience. The steep slopes, shining cliffs, springs, terraces, and long views over the valley made the sanctuary feel embedded in a geography larger than architecture. The temple did not conquer the mountain. It occupied a place within it. This differs from the ziggurat, where people built sacred height on a flat plain, and from the later Roman dome, where engineers brought a geometrical sky indoors. At Delphi, the mountain already existed. Human construction negotiated with it. Pilgrims climbed past treasuries filled with offerings from rival communities. Their bodies felt the slope. Their eyes moved between stone and horizon. By the time they reached Apollo's temple, the approach had already taught them that sacred authority sat above ordinary movement. The sanctuary also held games, musical contests, and public gatherings. Religion, sport, art, prestige, and diplomacy shared the same sacred landscape. This was not unusual in Greek religion. A sanctuary could be a place where communities encountered one another as much as a place where mortals encountered gods. The divine created neutral ground that was never completely neutral. War could still touch Delphi. Sacred wars were fought over control of the sanctuary and its surrounding territory. Treasures were looted in moments of crisis. Roman rulers later carried objects away. The place that gave divine answers to others could not protect itself from history. No temple could. Farther east, on the coast of Anatolia, the sanctuary of Artemis at Ephesus became famous for a different reason: scale, wealth, and a divine image whose form was deeply local even within the wider Greek world. The Artemis Scion at Ephesus was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The monumental temple built in the Archaic period and its later successor were enormous by Greek standards, with forests of columns and a sanctuary that attracted gifts and visitors across centuries. The goddess worship there was identified as Artemis, but Ephesian Artemis did not look like the youthful huntress familiar from many later Greek and Roman statues. Her cult image belonged to a local tradition whose iconography remains debated. Later representations show a rigid frontal figure covered with rows of rounded forms and symbolic ornament. Those forms have been interpreted in many ways as breasts, eggs, bull scrota, jewelry, or other cultic elements. Uncertainty has proved elusive. The uncertainty is useful. It reminds us that names can deceive. When Greeks called a deity Artemis, that did not mean every Artemis across the Mediterranean was understood in exactly the same way. Ancient religion was local even when divine names traveled widely. The sanctuary at Ephesus also became economically important. Temples could receive deposits, hold wealth, own land, and provide protected space. Sacred prestige could support practical trust. A person might believe that property placed under divine protection was safer because theft from a god carried consequences beyond ordinary law. Once again, the temple becomes more than a room for prayer. It becomes an institution whose sacred authority creates economic possibilities. Then, according to later tradition, a man named Herostratus set fire to the temple in 356 BCE because he wanted his name to be remembered. The story became one of antiquity's most famous examples of destructive fame. Authorities supposedly attempted to forbid mention of his name, and the prohibition failed so completely that his name is the part of the story that survived. Whether every detail of the later tradition is exact matters less than the moral problem it captured. Monumentality creates a temptation. If a building is famous enough, destroying it can become a way to enter history. Sacred architecture therefore produces not only pilgrims and patrons, but iconoclasts, looters, conquerors, and people who want to become important by damaging what others value. The temple was rebuilt. That response matters more than the fire. A sacred building does not necessarily lose holiness because it has been violated. Restoration can itself become ritual. Rebuilding announces that destruction did not have the final word. Ephesus changed under Hellenistic and Roman rule. The sanctuary continued. The city became one of the great urban centers of Roman Asia. New religions arrived. Christianity took root. The cult of Artemis eventually declined. Stone from ancient structures entered later buildings. Earthquakes, silting, political change, and altered trade routes transformed the city. The Great Temple became columns, fragments, foundations, memories, museum objects, and written descriptions. One of the seven wonders disappeared almost completely above ground. The fame survived the architecture. The Parthenon preserved far more stone. The Artemision preserved far more absence. Delphi preserved landscape. Jerusalem preserved sacred memory. The forms of survival were already multiplying before Rome gathered many of these older traditions into an empire of its own. Rome inherited much from Greek sacred architecture, but Roman builders were never content merely to copy Greek forms. They borrowed, enlarged, altered, combined, and engineered. A Roman temple could present a familiar columned facade, while hiding behind it a structural world that Greek builders had never created. Concrete, arches, vaults, domes, brick-faced cores, imported marbles, and imperial logistics allowed Roman sacred architecture to move inward in ways that would change the history of interior space. The Pantheon is the clearest example. Walk toward it in 2nd century Rome, and the first impression is conventional enough. A broad portico stands before you, carried by enormous granite columns. The inscription across the front names Marcus Agrippa, the associate of Augustus who built an earlier Pantheon on or near this site in the late 1st century BCE. The present building, however, belongs to a later reconstruction under the Emperor Hadrian in the early 2nd century CE. Hadrian kept Agrippa's name on the facade. That act alone tells us something about Roman architecture and memory. Roman emperors frequently restored older monuments and could choose whether to advertise themselves or the building's original founder. Hadrian's Pantheon presents a new engineering achievement behind a deliberately old inscription. Continuity is being manufactured even while almost everything has changed. Pass through the portico, and the building stops behaving like a Greek temple. The rotunda opens around you. The interior is a vast cylinder capped by a dome whose diameter and interior height are almost equal, creating the impression that a perfect sphere could fit within the space. The dome rises above patterned marble floors and alternating niches. Coffers reduce weight while shaping the surface. At the center of the dome is an opening to the sky, the oculus. There is no glass. Rain can enter. Sunlight enters. Air enters. The sky becomes part of the ceiling. A beam of sunlight moves across the interior as hours and seasons change. It touches coffers, walls, floors, and doorway. The building therefore refuses to become a sealed world. Its most daring enclosure contains deliberate exposure. Modern visitors often describe the effect as cosmic, and it is difficult not to. Yet we should be cautious about pretending we know exactly what every ancient visitor believed the oculus meant. The Pantheon's precise original ritual program remains debated. Its name suggests a relationship with many or all gods, but ancient evidence does not provide a simple guidebook explaining how Hadrian's interior was used on every occasion. That uncertainty makes the building more interesting, not less. The architecture survives more completely than the ritual. We can measure the dome more easily than we can recover the prayers. Roman engineers solved the problem of supporting enormous weight by varying materials and structure. Heavier aggregate could be used lower down, lighter material higher in the dome. Wall thickness, hidden relieving arches, and the geometry of the rotunda distribute loads through a system that later architects studied with admiration bordering on disbelief. But engineering alone does not explain why anyone wanted this room. The Roman Empire was full of technically demanding structures built for practical purposes: aqueducts, bridges, baths, roads, harbors. The Pantheon turns similar mastery toward experience. A person enters darkness beneath the portico and finds an interior ordered by circle and sphere. The eye rises. The oculus offers no image of a god. It offers sky. This is a different answer to the question with which we began. What is a temple for? At Karnak, the divine presence is concentrated in a dark sanctuary hidden by layers of restriction. At the Parthenon, a monumental image of Athena dominates the inner chamber while sacrifice occurs outside. At the Pantheon, architecture itself becomes so overwhelming that the room can feel like the principal sacred object. These are not stages in an evolution from primitive to advanced religion. They are different solutions to different theological, political, and architectural problems. Rome's solution was inseparable from empire. The materials themselves came from an imperial world. Granite columns traveled enormous distances. Colored marbles from different provinces turned the interior into a map of resources under Roman control. Moving such materials required quarries, labor, roads, ships, cranes, administrators, money, and political authority. The empire entered the temple as stone. A visitor might not consciously calculate the origin of each column, but the spectacle communicated reach. Rome could bring the world to Rome. The gods of empire could be housed beneath a dome built from the empire's mastery of matter. Yet the Pantheon survived because Rome changed. In 609 CE, centuries after the building's original creation, it was consecrated as a Christian church, Santa Maria ad Martyrs. That transformation altered its religious meaning profoundly. Images, rituals, calendars, and theological assumptions changed. But the new sacred use helped protect the structure from the kind of abandonment and systematic quarrying that destroyed many other ancient monuments. The building survived partly because worship did not stop. The god or gods changed. The sacred status remained. This is why the phrase "the gods are gone" is never quite adequate when speaking about ancient temples. Some sacred sites were abandoned entirely. Some were destroyed deliberately. Some were buried. Some remained sacred under new names. Some are still used by religious communities whose traditions developed long after the first stones were placed. And some traditions never became dead religions at all. The ancient world does not end everywhere at the same date. Sacred architecture makes that problem impossible to ignore. By the time Hadrian's builders completed the Pantheon, monumental religious architecture had already arisen independently on the other side of the Atlantic, in societies with no contact with Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome. There, too, people raised platforms toward the sky. There, too, rulers used sacred buildings to organize political power. There, too, processions, sacrifice, calendar, landscape, burial, and divine presence were joined in stone. The similarities are striking. The differences matter even more. In the Valley of Mexico, long before the Mexica rulers of Tenochtitlan built the temple the Spaniards would later describe with horror and fascination, another city had already created a sacred landscape on a scale that astonished later peoples. We do not know what its inhabitants called it. The name Teotihuacan came from Nahuatl-speaking peoples centuries after the city's great period had ended. By then, the enormous pyramids and ceremonial avenues had already become the remains of a past so impressive that later visitors placed them inside stories about the creation of gods and the ordering of the cosmos. That is a powerful fate for a ruined city. Its original language becomes uncertain. Its political history becomes difficult to reconstruct. Its monuments become evidence for someone else's mythology. At Teotihuacan, the Avenue of the Dead runs through a carefully organized urban landscape toward the Pyramid of the Moon, while the Pyramid of the Sun dominates another part of the ceremonial core. The names are later. The exact identities of the divine powers associated with these monuments are more complicated than the names suggest. Archaeology gives us buildings, offerings, murals, burials, ceramics, obsidian, traces of fire, human remains, patterns of urban residents, and the consequences of rebuilding. It does not give us a surviving priest explaining the theology in his own language. This creates a different kind of silence from Karnak. In Egypt, texts and images tell us a great deal about what priests believed they were doing. At Teotihuacan, interpretation must lean more heavily on material evidence. Walk the avenue in the 4th century CE, when the city is alive, and silence is the last word that would come to mind. Teotihuacan is enormous by the standards of the ancient Americas. Residential compounds extend beyond the ceremonial center. Craftspeople work obsidian. Merchants move goods. People from different regions live within the city, some in neighborhoods whose material culture suggests connections with Oaxaca, the Gulf Coast, or Maya lands. Murals fill walls with color. Water systems and streets organize movement. Smoke rises from domestic fires. The pyramids do not stand in isolation. They belong to a functioning city. As in Mesopotamia, the monumental sacred core gains meaning from the ordinary life around it. A pyramid's height matters partly because people spend most of their lives at ground level. A ceremonial avenue matters because daily movement usually follows smaller routes. A public ritual matters because most days are not festival days. The Pyramid of the Sun rises above the avenue as a mass of stepped construction, broader than it first appears because photographs flatten distance. Climbing changes the body. The stairs demand effort. Breathing changes. The city falls away behind. The horizon expands. Height produces theology through muscles. One does not need a written doctrine to understand that ascent can alter perception. But what happened on the summit, and exactly which divine being or beings were central there at different times, remain subjects of research. Archaeologists have identified tunnels and earlier features beneath the monument, including a man-made tunnel that extends below it. Such subterranean spaces may have held ritual meaning connected to origins, caves, water, or emergence, themes important across later Mesoamerican traditions, but we should not turn possibility into certainty. The monument has two directions at once: upward toward sky, downward into earth. Sacred mountains often do. A mountain can be where rain gathers, where ancestors dwell, where caves open, where clouds form, where gods emerge, where rulers ascend, where the dead are buried, and where the horizon can be read. Building a mountain in a city gives political authority access to all of these associations. At Teotihuacan, evidence from the Temple of the Feathered Serpent reveals another side of monumental religion. Burials associated with the monument included individuals who appear to have been sacrificed, some accompanied by weapons or ornaments suggesting military identity. The discovery changed modern interpretations of the city. Teotihuacan could no longer be romanticized simply as a peaceful ceremonial metropolis governed only by priests and cosmic harmony. Sacred architecture had a cost. Sometimes that cost was measured in labor, sometimes in tribute, sometimes in captive bodies. The people climbing steps to ritual platforms lived in a world where religion and political violence could reinforce one another, just as they did in other ancient societies. This does not make the religions identical. It means human power repeatedly learned to speak in sacred language. That language could be beautiful. Murals from Teotihuacan show elaborate figures, plants, water, birds, shells, flowing forms, and supernatural imagery. Color-covered surfaces that now appear muted or bare. Incense altered the air. Costumes transformed human bodies. Sound traveled along plazas. Featherwork, masks, textiles, and objects now lost would have been as important to the spectacle as stone. A ruined pyramid is only the skeleton of a ceremony. The ceremony had skin. It had sound. It had smell. It had food, costume, speech, blood, smoke, movement, and expectation. When Teotihuacan's political order weakened and parts of the ceremonial center were burned in the 6th century, the monuments did not become meaningless. Later peoples visited, reused, remembered, and renamed the place. The city that had once created sacred architecture became sacred ancestry for civilizations that came after it. This is another way temples survive, not through continued worship of the same gods, but through inherited awe. Far to the southeast, Maya rulers developed their own monumental landscapes within forests and river valleys where stone pyramids rose above dense vegetation. At Tikal, in what is now Guatemala, the tops of great temples still break through the forest canopy. Modern photographs often show them emerging above green trees in a way that feels almost otherworldly. Ancient Tikal, however, was not a lost city hidden in pristine jungle. Its monumental core stood within a heavily modified landscape of plazas, reservoirs, causeways, residences, fields, quarries, and managed resources. The forest visible today is partly the result of centuries after political collapse. At the height of the city, the sacred skyline was human-made. One of Tikal's most recognizable monuments, often called Temple I or the Temple of the Great Jaguar, was associated with the ruler Teotihuacan I, who reigned in the 8th century CE. His burial lay beneath the structure. The temple therefore joined rulership, death, memory, and height in one architectural statement. The king was not merely remembered with a tombstone. He became part of the sacred mountain of the city. Maya rulership drew authority from relationships with gods, ancestors, time, and cosmic order. Royal bloodletting rituals, accession ceremonies, warfare, captive-taking, calendrical commemorations, and ancestor veneration could all become subjects for inscriptions and images. Temples and stelae turned political events into part of a cosmic chronology. This is where writing changes sacred architecture. A wall can show a god. A stair can elevate a priest. An inscription can tell the future exactly which day a king performed an act and which ancestors legitimized him. Maya scribes recorded dates with extraordinary precision. The monument could therefore stand at the intersection of architecture and timekeeping. A building was not simply somewhere a ritual happened. It could anchor that ritual inside a historical and cosmic sequence. Imagine a ceremony in a great plaza. The crowd below cannot all hear every word spoken at the summit. Many cannot see the details of carved inscriptions from where they stand. That does not make the architecture ineffective. Distance is part of the message. The ruler is above. The temple is above. Ancestors and gods are approached through height, costume, blood, smoke, and controlled access. The crowd witnesses enough. Sacred architecture often depends upon partial visibility. At Karnak, most people cannot see the cult statue in the sanctuary. At Ellora most cannot access the highest sacred spaces. At Tikal, distance separates the many from ceremonies performed by the few. A temple tells people that something important is happening partly by preventing everyone from participating in the same way. Restriction creates intensity, but sacred architecture can also invite mass movement. Plazas hold crowds. Causeways guide processions. Stairways create dramatic ascent. Calendrical festivals concentrate people who normally live dispersed across wider landscapes. The temple does both things at once. It gathers, then it separates. By the early 16th century, when Spanish forces entered the basin of Mexico, this logic of gathering and separation stood at the center of Tenochtitlan in one of the most politically charged sacred complexes in the Americas. The Templo Mayor rose within the ceremonial heart of the Mexica capital. Tenochtitlan itself was extraordinary, an island city linked by causeways, crossed by canals, supplied by markets, gardens, aqueducts, tribute, and the labor of an empire. Spanish eyewitnesses, despite their hostility and their tendency to interpret what they saw through European categories, repeatedly expressed astonishment at its scale, order, and wealth. At the city's sacred center, the Templo Mayor carried two principal shrines at its summit. One was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, associated with war, solar power, and Mexico identity. The other was dedicated to Tlaloc, the ancient rain and fertility deity whose worship long predated the Mexica Empire. The dual arrangement was not decorative symmetry. It expressed a world in which military power and agricultural survival were both necessary. War could bring captives and tribute. Rain brought maize. An empire could survive enemies and still die of drought. At the base of the temple, architecture and myth met with extraordinary force. A monumental stone sculpture of Coyolxauhqui, the dismembered moon-associated sister of Huitzilopochtli in Mexica myth, lay near the foot of the stairway leading toward Huitzilopochtli's shrine. In the mythic narrative, Huitzilopochtli defeats and dismembers Coyolxauhqui at the mountain Coatepec. Ritual sacrifice at the temple could reproduce aspects of this sacred violence spatially, with bodies descending from the summit toward the image below. The temple was therefore not merely a stage placed beneath myth. Its structure allowed myth to happen again. That is an important principle of sacred architecture. A temple can make a story physical. In Egypt, walking through a hypostyle hall can evoke creation from the primordial marsh. At Tikal, ascending a pyramid can approach dynastic ancestors and divine realms. At Tenochtitlan, the temple becomes sacred mountain, imperial center, and site where mythic victory is ritually renewed. Human sacrifice was real within Mexica religion, and archaeological evidence from the Templo Mayor complex supports the historical testimony that captives and others were killed in ritual contexts. It is also an area where numbers became weapons of propaganda almost immediately. Early colonial accounts sometimes give enormous totals that modern historians cannot simply accept at face value. The scale was significant. The exact totals on particular occasions are often uncertain. We do not need inflated numbers to understand the seriousness of the practice. A single person led up a staircase knows the scale of one death perfectly. From the Mexica perspective, sacrifice belonged to systems of reciprocity with divine powers and to stories in which gods themselves had sacrificed, offered blood, or required nourishment for cosmic continuity. From the perspective of a captive, theology did not make the stone knife less real. Both truths belong in the same history. Ancient religion was not made gentler by understanding it. Understanding simply prevents us from replacing one simplification with another. The Templo Mayor accumulated offerings from across the empire and beyond. Archaeologists have recovered shells, coral, animals, stone objects, masks, blades, sculptures, human remains, and materials brought from distant environments. Depositing these objects was not equivalent to storing them in a warehouse. Their placement created sacred assemblages whose meaning depended on location, orientation, symbolism, and ritual action. The empire entered the temple as matter. Here again, across an ocean from Rome, sacred architecture collected the world. The Pantheon displayed stones from imperial territories. The Templo Mayor received materials drawn through networks of tribute and exchange. Karnak accumulated wealth from royal patronage and estates. The Parthenon displayed resources at the center of Athenian power. Temples became places where distant labor was concentrated into local holiness. That concentration could make empire appear natural. If the gods receive the tribute, then the political order that delivers tribute can present itself as sacred order. If victory builds temples, victory can become visible as divine favor. If conquered wealth decorates a sanctuary, conquest enters memory as piety. The distinction between religion and propaganda becomes difficult because ancient rulers had no reason to keep them neatly separated. Then the strangers arrived. The Spanish invasion of Mexico brought military conflict, epidemic disease, indigenous alliances against Mexico rule, political collapse, and religious destruction on a scale the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan could not have imagined when the temple was functioning at the center of the empire. The Templo Mayor was dismantled after the conquest. Stone from the sacred precinct entered the colonial city. Christian buildings rose in the same urban landscape. Mexico City developed above Tenochtitlan until streets and houses concealed much of the ancient center. The temple disappeared without leaving. That sounds impossible, but cities do it constantly. A building can vanish above ground while its foundations remain beneath daily life. For centuries, people walked over the sacred center of Tenochtitlan without seeing its full form. Then archaeology reopened the buried city. The discovery of the Great Coelzaqui stone in 1978 helped trigger large-scale excavation. Buildings were removed to expose parts of the temple precinct. Layers of construction appeared because Mexico rulers had repeatedly enlarged the Templo Mayor by building new stages over older ones. Sacred growth had preserved its own past. Inside later walls, earlier temples survived. Archaeologists could peel back political time in the reverse order from which it had been built. This is a strange afterlife for a sacred mountain. First, priests cover an older temple to create a larger one. Then conquerors destroy the visible building. Then a colonial city buries the remains. Then archaeologists remove later structures to reveal earlier layers. Every age decides which past should be visible. There is no neutral city above a ruin. The Templo Mayor reminds us that silence can be engineered after conquest. Sacred buildings are dangerous to new regimes because they organize memory. Destroying them can be an attempt to destroy the political and divine order they represent. Building a new sacred structure nearby or above them announces that authority has changed not only on earth, but in heaven. The ancient Mediterranean knew this as well. Christian communities reused temples, transformed sanctuaries, attacked some cult images, ignored others, and sometimes preserved buildings precisely by giving them new sacred purpose. Late antique religious change was not one simple wave of destruction. It varied by region, politics, local community, and building. Some temples decayed because their institutions lost support. Some were quarried. Some became churches. Some remained landmarks long after rituals ceased. The end of a religion is usually less tidy than a textbook date. And the story of temples does not actually end when historians conventionally say antiquity ends. This is where the original temptation of our journey becomes dangerous. It is easy to take every old sacred building and place it inside one category called ancient. But Angkor Wat is not an ancient temple in the same chronological sense as Karnak or the Parthenon. The famous temples of Khajuraho belong mainly to the 10th and 11th centuries CE. Angkor's great monuments belong to the medieval Khmer world from the 9th to the 15th centuries. Their inclusion in a story of ancient architecture is useful only if we say clearly that we have crossed a historical boundary. So let us cross it deliberately, not because antiquity secretly continued unchanged, but because the problem temples were built to solve did continue. How can stone make divine presence approachable? How can architecture turn a mountain, a myth, a body, a direction, or a cosmic diagram into a place a human being can enter? In India, sacred architecture developed along paths whose roots reached deep into antiquity and whose living traditions continued through periods European chronology labels late antique and medieval. At Ellora, in western India, builders and sculptors carved monasteries and temples directly into a basalt escarpment between roughly the 6th and 10th centuries CE. Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain monuments stand within the same extended complex. One of the most astonishing, the Kailasa temple, was not assembled from quarried blocks in the usual way. It was excavated downward from living rock. This reverses the logic of ordinary construction. A conventional builder creates a column by adding or arranging material. At Kailasa, a column appears because everything around it is removed. The temple is discovered inside the mountain by subtraction. That is not literally how the builders would have described the engineering, but it captures the experience. Thousands upon thousands of tons of rock had to be removed with planning precise enough that errors could not simply be corrected by bringing back the stone. A mountain became architecture without ceasing to be mountain. The sacred metaphor and the building process became the same action. By the time the great temples of Khajuraho were built under the Chandela rulers around the 10th and 11th centuries, northern Indian temple architecture had developed soaring exterior forms dense with sculpture. The temple's famous erotic imagery forms only a portion of much larger sculptural programs that include deities, attendants, musicians, warriors, animals, celestial beings, and scenes of human life. Modern visitors often allow the erotic figures to swallow the entire monument because they violate expectations shaped by other religious traditions. The builders did not isolate sacred life from embodied life so neatly. Scholars have proposed different interpretations for the erotic imagery, and no single explanation resolves every scene. What is clear is that the carvings belong to a larger architectural and religious program, not to a hidden secular joke placed on sacred walls. The body can stand at the temple threshold without being the enemy of the divine. That insight belongs to the history of temples, even if Khajuraho lies beyond what we should strictly call the ancient world. Farther east, Angkor Wat carries the mountain principle to another extraordinary scale. Built in the 12th century under Suryavarman II, it belongs to the Khmer Empire, not to antiquity. Its towers evoke Mount Meru within Hindu cosmology, and its vast galleries carry reliefs drawn from epic, divine, and royal worlds. Over time, the site's religious identity changed, and Buddhist worship became deeply associated with it. This matters because Angkor Wat never became simply an abandoned fossil of one dead faith. Sacred use changed. Political centers shifted. Forests and water systems altered. But devotion persisted in forms the original builders did not fully anticipate. The temple survived partly as heritage and partly as sacred place. Once again, the building lived by changing. These later examples belong here not because chronology should be ignored, but because they reveal what the ancient temples had already discovered. A temple is not only a structure, it is a technology of continuity. It takes something invisible, divine presence, cosmic order, royal legitimacy, ancestral power, moral obligation, and gives it doors, stairs, walls, images, routes, schedules, smells, sounds, and labor. The invisible becomes maintainable because people can perform actions around it. Light the incense, climb the stair, carry the image, bring the grain, wash the statue, kill the animal, pour the water, open the door, close the door, return tomorrow. The repetition is what gives the building life. And when the repetition stops, stone begins its second existence. That second existence can make us forget how difficult the first one was. Before a temple could become a ruin, somebody had to persuade stone to move. This sounds obvious until we imagine the weight. At Athens, marble for the Parthenon came from Mount Pentelicus, northeast of the city. Quarrymen had to identify usable stone, cut channels around blocks, separate them from the bedrock, rough shape them, and move them down from the mountain. Roads had to bear loads they had not been designed for in any modern sense. Oxen, rollers, sledges, ropes, wooden frames, teams of workers, and careful planning turned mountain into architecture one block at a time. A finished column hides the quarry. A polished floor hides the hands that drag material across dust. A perfect joint hides every moment when a block almost cracked. At Karnak, some stone came from quarries far up the Nile. Obelisks of granite were cut at Aswan and transported north by river. An obelisk that appears to be a single effortless gesture in stone is actually a record of extraction, transport, seasonal timing, engineering, labor, and political organization. If one stage failed, the monument never stood. At Rome, the problem became imperial in scale. Enormous columns and colored marbles traveled by sea from distant provinces. Stone left a quarry in Egypt or Asia Minor, moved to a port, crossed the Mediterranean, entered the Tiber system, and was hauled through a city already crowded with buildings and people. The finished temple turned geography into architecture. At Ellora, movement took the opposite form. The mountain did not travel. Workers removed the mountain around the temple they intended to leave behind. At Teotihuacan, enormous volumes of stone, fill, plaster, and labor created pyramids through repeated construction and enlargement. At Tenochtitlan, successive rulers wrapped older stages of the Templo Mayor inside newer ones, raising the sacred center as imperial power grew. The methods differed. The human problem was the same. How do you make thousands of people contribute to a building whose full purpose only a few may understand, and whose innermost rooms only a few may enter? There is no single answer. Some workers were paid. Some fulfilled obligations to rulers or temples. Some were specialists whose skills gave them status. Some were prisoners, enslaved people, or coerced laborers depending on the society and project. Some worked because religious duty, political obligation, household survival, and economic necessity were not separable categories in their lives. It would be comforting to imagine every temple built entirely through willing devotion. It would be equally misleading to imagine every ancient monument built by chained slaves. Reality varied. What can be said is that sacred architecture concentrates labor. A temple takes years of human life and converts them into permanence. The building remains after the workers die. That asymmetry is one reason kings like monuments. A ruler's body ages quickly. Stone ages slowly. An inscription can claim that a king built for eternity even while the men cutting the inscription know that the king, like every other person, will eventually stop breathing. Monumentality is partly an argument against time. Temples make that argument especially forcefully because they promise continuity not only for rulers but for cosmic relationships. The offering will continue. The festival will return. The god will remain. The city will endure because the sacred order has been given walls. And the temple that emerged from all that labor did not look the way its ruin looks now. This difference deserves time because modern taste has quietly repainted antiquity. We are accustomed to pale stone. Museum galleries taught generations to admire Greek sculpture as white marble. Photographs of Egyptian ruins often emphasize sand-colored walls beneath a blue sky. Broken Mesoamerican temples rise in gray stone above green forest. The absence of roofs lets sunlight flood spaces that ancient builders intended to control. The ancient temple was far more colorful. Greek architectural sculpture carried paint. Egyptian reliefs could glow with reds, blues, yellows, greens, blacks, and whites. Maya and Central Mexican ceremonial buildings were plastered and painted. Wooden doors, textiles, metal fittings, feathers, flowers, garlands, shields, banners, and ritual clothing added colors that almost never survive in the same way as stone. The temple also moved. Flames trembled. Incense drifted. Cloth shifted in air. Processional objects rocked on shoulders. Jewelry caught light. A bronze surface changed as someone walked past it. The divine image that appears frozen in a museum photograph could seem almost alive when oil lamps moved shadows across polished eyes and gold surfaces. Light was never neutral. A dark sanctuary made a lamp important. A doorway framed brightness. A columned hall broke sunlight into alternating bands. An open altar placed sacrifice under the sky. The Pantheon's oculus allowed the day itself to move through the room. Architecture directed light the way ritual directed people. Sound changed with walls as well. A chant in a narrow stone chamber does not behave like a shout in an open plaza. Drums heard from the top of a pyramid traveled differently from whispered prayers near a shrine. Bronze instruments, rattles, flutes, horns, clapping, singing, and recitation filled sacred environments with rhythms that ruins cannot preserve. Even silence had levels. The silence of waiting before an oracle was not the silence of an abandoned temple. The silence of a priest entering a sanctuary was not the silence of tourists who have gone home. One contained expectation. The other contains memory. Smell may be the most completely lost part of ancient sacred architecture. Incense mattered because it transformed air. Burning resin announced sacred action before a person could see its source. Animal sacrifice added blood, smoke, roasting meat, hide, fat, and ash. Flowers and oils added sweetness. Crowds added sweat. Dust entered with feet. River water, wet plaster, cedar, wine, beer, grain, and lamp smoke all belonged to sacred places depending on region and ritual. A temple could smell holy because holiness had ingredients. The idea may sound strange only because modern heritage sites are cleaned of ritual life. Ancient worshippers did not encounter architecture through vision alone. Their bodies were fully involved. Heat mattered. Weight mattered. The texture of a floor beneath bare feet mattered in traditions where footwear was removed. The strain of climbing stairs mattered. The press of a festival crowd mattered. Fasting, purification, exhaustion, fear, expectation, music, darkness, and smell could alter perception before a sacred image appeared. The temple did not need to convince an abstract mind. It worked on a body. This is one reason scale was so effective. A column 20 meters high does not communicate its height as a number. It communicates through the neck tilting backward. A long approach does not communicate distance as a measurement. It communicates through tired legs. A restricted door does not communicate hierarchy as a political theory. It communicates when a guard stops you and another person passes. Sacred architecture turns ideas into physical experiences. The same principle could also produce fear. A captive climbing the Templo Mayor experienced sacred height very differently from a priest approaching his shrine. An animal being led toward a Greek altar was part of a ritual feast for the community, but also a living body moving toward death. A worker hauling stone for a royal temple might admire the god and resent the obligation in the same afternoon. The temple did not create one emotion shared equally by everyone around it. Power rarely does. For the ruler, monumentality could mean legitimacy. For the priest, responsibility. For the artisan, skill and livelihood. For the pilgrim, hope. For the conquered, humiliation. For the captive, terror. For the child, wonder. A building can hold all of these meanings without choosing between them. That complexity is part of what makes ancient temples worth following from one civilization to another. Their stones are stable enough to compare. The human experiences around them are not. And because the living experience was so much richer than the surviving stone, the end of ritual involved more than a door closing. It meant the disappearance of an entire sensory world. Then something interrupts the pattern. Sometimes interruption is sudden. An invading army breaches a city. Fire reaches a sanctuary. A cult image is taken. Priests flee. A roof collapses during an earthquake. A ruler orders a religious institution suppressed. Sometimes the end is so slow that no one living through it knows which day future historians will choose as the moment the temple died. Attendance declines. An endowment disappears. A roof repair is postponed. A priestly office is no longer filled. A procession becomes smaller. A storeroom empties. One generation still knows the old hymns. The next remembers fragments. A local family continues leaving an offering in a corner even after official ritual has stopped. Children grow up hearing that a chamber was once holy without ever seeing it opened. The last ritual may not feel like the last ritual. That thought changes the silence of ruins. Imagine a temple servant at the end of an age. He closes a door because that is what he has always done. He assumes someone will open it tomorrow. Perhaps nobody does. The building does not know that its first life is over. Stone has no calendar. Rain enters through a damaged roof. Birds nest where lamps once burned. Dust collects on an offering table. A bronze fitting becomes worth more to a scavenger than the memory of the ritual it once served. Wood disappears first. Textiles vanish. Food rots. Paint fades. Metal is removed because metal can be melted and used again. Stone survives because stone is heavy, but heaviness does not guarantee safety. A temple is also a quarry already organized into useful blocks. Later builders see columns as available material. A sacred wall becomes a house foundation. A carved block turns inward so nobody sees the old god on its face. Marble enters a church, a mosque, a palace, a fortification, or a lime kiln. Reuse can look like destruction from one perspective and practical continuity from another. Why quarry fresh stone if an abandoned monument offers excellent material nearby? The dead religion has already paid the cost of extraction. New society inherits the stone. This process happened throughout the ancient world. It is one reason we should not imagine ruins as buildings left politely untouched after worship ceased. Many ancient cities cannibalized themselves. Foundations disappeared beneath later streets. Sculptures were burned for lime. Bronze clamps were pulled from masonry, sometimes cracking blocks in the process. Columns were moved to new buildings where their original meaning mattered less than their strength and beauty. Yet reuse could also preserve. The Pantheon survived in extraordinary condition partly because it remained a place of worship under Christianity. Some ancient columns survive because later churches incorporated them. Temples converted into churches or other sacred buildings continued to receive maintenance even as their original rituals vanished. A building can survive by losing its first identity. This would have horrified some of its original priests. It also saved stone they intended to last. Preservation is full of such ironies. The Parthenon survived centuries of transformation, but not intact. Its conversion to a church altered the interior. Later it served as a mosque. In the 17th century, during conflict between Venice and the Ottoman Empire, the building was used to store gunpowder. A Venetian bombardment in 1687 struck the structure, and the explosion devastated the ancient temple. A building designed to symbolize civic endurance became a military target because war had given it a completely different practical use. History does not respect symbolism. It uses available rooms. The damage we now call tragic was not delivered to a museum object. It happened to a structure still embedded in a living conflict. The same is true of many sacred ruins. They became forts because they occupied strong ground. They became houses because walls remained standing. They became stables, workshops, markets, cemeteries, churches, mosques, shrines, and quarries. Modern archaeology arrived late. By the time European scholars, collectors, diplomats, antiquarians, and excavators began systematically studying ancient temples, local communities had often lived among the ruins for centuries. The modern idea that a monument belongs primarily to archaeology can collide with older patterns of use and ownership. Excavation, therefore, changes a site. To uncover one period, archaeologists may remove later deposits. To restore a classical building, conservators may decide that a medieval wall is less important. To create a clear visitor route, modern authorities may move stones that had rested in one place for centuries. Every attempt to reveal the past also edits it. This does not mean archaeology is false. It means archaeology is an action in history, not an escape from history. The first excavators did not all share modern standards. Objects were removed to imperial capitals. Sculptures entered private and national collections. Excavations could be driven by competition, prestige, diplomacy, or the desire to possess spectacular pieces. Local laborers did much of the physical work while foreign directors received much of the credit. Modern museums inherited both knowledge and controversy from that age. A temple fragment in a museum is safer from rain and theft than it may have been in an exposed ruin. It is also separated from the light, distance, landscape, and architectural sequence that once gave it meaning. A carved figure designed to be seen high above a sanctuary becomes an object at eye level behind glass. A relief that once participated in procession becomes a numbered accession. A column drum becomes evidence. The museum gains detail. The temple loses context. Neither experience is complete. This is especially obvious with sculpture from the Parthenon. Large portions of the surviving sculptural program are divided between Athens and the British Museum, along with fragments in other collections. The history of their removal and the continuing dispute over where they should be displayed belongs to modern politics as much as ancient art. We do not need to settle that dispute tonight to understand what it reveals. Ancient temples still generate claims. States claim them as national heritage. Museums claim responsibility for preservation and global access. Source communities claim context and historical justice. Scholars claim the need to study objects across borders. Visitors claim a right to encounter world heritage. The God's house has become a courtroom of modern values. The argument is evidence that the building is not dead. Dead things do not provoke this much care. At Karnak, restoration raises different questions. A fallen column can be left where it lies as evidence of collapse, or it can be re-erected to help visitors understand the original space. A wall can be consolidated without rebuilding missing sections. Color can be reconstructed digitally rather than painted onto ancient stone. A damaged relief can be protected from water while preserving the marks of damage that belong to its history. Conservators must constantly decide which kind of truth matters most. The truth of the original design? The truth of the ruin? The truth of every historical layer? No site can display all of them equally. Even silence has to be managed. Modern visitors arrive in buses. Phones rise. Guides speak in multiple languages. Security guards watch. Restoration equipment operates. Aircraft cross the sky. Nearby cities produce traffic, pollution, and construction. The ancient temple is not naturally silent. Silence is something a visitor may have to wait for. And when it comes, it is not the silence the ancient priest knew. His temple was alive with ritual. Our silence belongs to distance. We stand in a place whose rules no longer control us. At Karnak, a modern visitor can walk through spaces from which most ancient Egyptians were excluded. At the Parthenon, people from every nation approach a building once embedded in the citizenship and empire of one city. At Delphi, visitors climb the sacred way without needing permission from Apollo's priesthood. At Teotihuacan, archaeologists and tourists move through an urban ceremonial center whose original language is not fully recoverable. At the Templo Mayor, museum labels explain rituals that Spanish conquerors tried to destroy in colonial buildings once buried. Access has widened because belief has changed. That widening creates an illusion. We can walk farther than ancient worshippers, so we imagine we understand more. But access to rooms is not access to minds. We can stand where a priest stood and still not feel what he felt. We can photograph a sanctuary and not know how fear, duty, habit, and divine presence occupied the same few square meters for him. Historical imagination has limits. Those limits are worth respecting. When we say an Egyptian cult statue was a place of divine manifestation, we are translating ideas that belong to a language and theology not our own. When we say a Greek god lived in a temple, we simplify local practices that varied by sanctuary and period. When we describe a Mesoamerican pyramid as a sacred mountain, we use a helpful pattern without claiming every monument had the same meaning. When we call a Hindu image a statue, we risk importing a modern category into a tradition in which ritual presence transforms what the image is. The temple teaches humility because the building is more recoverable than the experience. Stone remains. Meaning survives unevenly. Some meanings are written on walls. Some are preserved in ritual texts. Some continue in living traditions. Some can be inferred from deposits and architecture. Some are lost. The lost parts are not invitations to invent whatever sounds mysterious. They are part of the truth. There are rooms in history we cannot reopen. This is why astronomical claims about temples require care. Ancient builders certainly observed the sky. Calendars depended on celestial cycles. Some monuments have demonstrable alignments with solar events, horizon points, or other astronomical phenomena. But a building can face east for several reasons. A corridor can capture light without encoding a secret calendar. A city grid can respond to topography and ritual simultaneously. The temptation to turn every ancient structure into an observatory comes from our desire for one hidden key. Ancient temples rarely offer one key. They offer layers. The same is true of mathematics. Ancient architects used sophisticated geometry, measurement, proportion, and practical knowledge. But later enthusiasts often discover supposedly perfect universal constants in buildings by choosing measurements after the fact. The real achievements are more impressive than numerological fantasies because they had to work under physical conditions. A column had to stand. A roof had to transfer weight. A stair had to be climbable. A procession had to fit through a gate. A statue had to be installed. A chamber had to remain dark enough for ritual while allowing priests to function. A temple was not a diagram built for future puzzle solvers. It was a working institution. Working institutions require maintenance. That may be the least glamorous and most important fact in this entire story. Every great temple depended on people who repaired roofs, people who swept floors, people who replaced ropes, people who removed waste after festivals, people who repainted surfaces, people who carried water, people who kept accounts, people who trained replacements, people who noticed cracks before they widened. Monumentality survives through ordinary care. The gods may receive the credit. Maintenance keeps the rain out. This is true now as well. World-famous ruins survive because conservators monitor stone, engineers study foundations, guards prevent theft, local authorities manage water, archaeologists document change, and communities decide that preservation deserves money that could be spent elsewhere. Every generation that preserves a temple makes an offering of its own, not to the original deity, necessarily, to memory. That offering can become political too. Governments use ancient monuments to tell stories about national greatness. Tourism converts sacred history into economic value. A temple appears on currency, airline advertisements, school books, logos, and political speeches. The monument becomes evidence that a modern nation descends from an admired ancient past. Sometimes the connection is real and complicated. Sometimes it is invented or simplified. Ancient people rarely imagine the modern nations that claim them. The Athenians who built the Parthenon did not think of Greece as a 19th or 21st century nation-state. The builders of Karnak did not imagine archaeology ministries. The people of Teotihuacan did not call themselves Mexicans. The rulers of Tenochtitlan could not imagine their sacred center becoming an excavation surrounded by one of the largest modern cities on Earth. Yet modern identity needs landscapes, and ancient temples are powerful landscapes. They make the past visible enough to stand beside. This visibility can be comforting. It can also be dangerous. If a monument is treated as proof that one modern group owns the whole past, archaeology becomes a weapon. If one historical layer is erased to make another appear pure, preservation becomes selective memory. The most honest temples are the complicated ones. A reused column, a blocked doorway, a Christian cross cut into pagan stone, an Islamic inscription on an ancient wall, a modern support holding up a classical fragment, a trench revealing an older phase beneath a later floor. These layers show that history did not move cleanly from one civilization to the next. People inherited what they found. They changed it. We are doing the same. Near the end of the journey, the question from the beginning no longer feels like a question that can be answered by naming buildings. Instead, imagine that the monuments disappear for a moment and only the human movements remain. A priest passes through a doorway while everyone else stops. A procession emerges from darkness into sunlight. A worker braces a rope and feels a block of stone begin to move. A pilgrim waits for an answer that may change a family, a voyage, or a war. A ruler places wealth before a god and hopes that power will look like favor. A captive climbs steps knowing that the crowd below sees a sacred ceremony while he experiences something entirely different. A child looks upward and learns, without anyone explaining it, that some places are larger than ordinary life. Centuries later, another person enters the same space without the old purification, the old fear, or the old words. The rules have vanished, but the architecture still directs the body. The doorway narrows attention. The stair demands effort. The darkness slows the pace. The height pulls the eyes upward. Nothing in these gestures makes Ellora, Karnak, Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, Teotihuacan, or Tenochtitlan the same religion. That is not the point. The point is that stone can organize a relationship before anyone explains the theology behind it. A temple does not merely tell people what a society believes. It teaches them where belief is supposed to happen. The forms differ because the gods differ. The societies differ. The landscapes differ. The political systems differ. The technologies differ. But temples repeatedly perform one human act. They make relationships spatial. They tell you where to stand, where not to stand, which direction to face, what to bring, what to leave outside, how far you may go, who may go farther, where the image waits, where the altar burns, where the dead king lies, where the sun enters, where the god may speak, where memory must not be forgotten. A temple takes invisible hierarchy and turns it into a floor plan. This is why architecture can teach theology without words. A child does not need to read an inscription to understand that the highest stair is important. A pilgrim does not need a philosophy of sacred space to feel the change from bright court to dark chamber. A citizen watching a procession does not need to enter the sanctuary to understand that something hidden inside it possesses authority. The body learns before the mind explains. Climb. Wait. Bow. Remove sandals. Washington, stop at the gate. Look upward. Listen. Temples are instructions written at human scale. And now most of the ancient instructions no longer bind us. We cross thresholds without purification. We photograph images once hidden. We enter with tickets instead of offerings. We learn the names of gods from labels. We stand where kings stood because a rope barrier happens to allow it. The transformation is so complete that ancient sacred fear can be difficult to recover. Perhaps that is why modern visitors seek silence. Silence creates distance from tourism and brings back a little uncertainty. For a moment, the ruin stops being information. It becomes space again. So imagine Karnak once more. Not modern Karnak beneath floodlights. Not the archaeological plan. Not the photograph of columns beneath blue sky. Return to the morning before sunrise. The priest has completed the ritual. The god has received offerings. Incense has thinned into the dark air. Outside the sanctuary, other temple workers are already moving through their tasks. Scribes will record. Bakers will bake. Boats will unload. Guards will watch gates. Craftsmen will repair what needs repair. Priests will perform other rites. Petitioners will wait in places where they are allowed to wait. The sacred world depends on an enormous amount of ordinary work. The priest stands before the divine image one final moment before closing the shrine. He does not think of archaeology. He does not imagine tourists. He does not know that his gods will one day be studied as mythology by people speaking languages not yet formed. He does not know which columns will fall or which names will be erased. He does not know that the temple will outlive the political system that funds it, the priesthood that serves it, and the language in which its rituals are spoken. For him, eternity is not a metaphor. The ritual will continue because it must continue. Tomorrow the door will open again. That confidence is what built the ancient temples. Not confidence that stone could never break. Confidence that the relationship being maintained was larger than one human lifetime. Every generation inherited the obligation from the one before. Carry the image. Renew the wall. Teach the words. Replace the linen. Bring the offering. Remember the name. The priest closes the shrine doors. Darkness returns to the chamber. Outside, morning reaches the eastern sky. The first sunlight touches stone that will still be standing more than 3,000 years later. The priest never sees that future. He does not need to. His task belongs to this morning. Ours belongs to another. We stand among what survived and try not to confuse survival with completeness. We see columns, but not the banners that moved between them. We see altars, but not the animals approaching. We see stairways, but not the captives, pilgrims, priests, kings, workers, children, merchants, and soldiers who climbed them. We see stone gods without the lamps that made their faces move in darkness. We see floor plans without the rules that made one doorway terrifying and another ordinary. We hear silence where once there was music, and still, the buildings communicate. A pylon tells us to cross. A stair tells us to rise. A sanctuary tells us to narrow our attention. A dome tells us to look upward. A ruined wall tells us that permanence was attempted and failed only partially. That partial failure may be the reason ancient temples remain so moving. If they had vanished completely, we would possess only stories. If they had survived perfectly, unchanged and uninterrupted, they would not feel ancient in the same way. Instead, they stand between presence and absence. Enough remains to imagine. Enough is missing to prevent certainty. Stone, gods, silence. The three words of our title belong to different kinds of time. Stone survives longest. Gods survive as long as people worship, remember, rename, argue about, or study them. Silence arrives last. And even silence is not permanent. Tomorrow morning the gates open. Visitors return. Footsteps cross the old floors. Someone looks up at a column. Someone lowers their voice without being told. For one moment, in a building whose ritual they do not share, they feel that ordinary behavior would be somehow wrong. The temple has no priest waiting for them. No ancient law commands them. No sacrifice is required. Still, they pause. Perhaps architecture can preserve a gesture after it loses the theology that created it. Perhaps that is one of the quietest forms of survival. The door is closed now. The stone is cool. The sanctuary is dark. Outside, the city wakes. Sleep well. Good night.